Hello, g'day, and welcome back to the channel. This is my March TBR. Last month, my Feb TBR, I told you I was going to read all these books, and I lied to you. I didn't get through them all, so I promised you in March it would be different, and I did not let you down this time. We got all 6 books read, so let's start talking about them. So I'm actually going to start with the book that you guys suggested me to read first, which was The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin, and man, this book was super surprising. First of all, I didn't know that it was going to be grimdark and just, oh man, the consequences of the events in this book and of the magic system were so dire and so devastating. It just, this gripped me a lot. And I also didn't know that the magic system within this world was going to be kind of sci-fi. I thought it was just pure out and out fantasy, and it was, but it really felt like the magic system had elements of sci-fi in it, which I personally really appreciated. Now, I'm definitely going to do a review on this book because there was so much to talk about and so much to like about this book, but also some things that were really unique and interesting. For example, the writing style of N.K. Jemisin was very unique. In fact, one of the characters that we follow throughout this book is actually told in the second person. So it's like, you went down here, you overheard them speaking. And it kind of, we knew that they weren't talking about us, but it was written in a way where I was able to appreciate what the character was going through and kind of being able to relate to it in some weird way with a character I don't know really anything about. So I thought that was really well executed. But some people might not love it. For me, I would have said on paper before I read the book that I wouldn't have enjoyed that at all, but I actually really did. I thought the execution was quite good and it really gripped me and brought me into the world. Now, something else about this story is it was very much driven by the characters, which is super hit and miss for me. If I love the characters, it's a big win. If I don't love the characters, even if I don't love one of the characters, that can totally spoil a story for me. But I love a story that's character driven if they nail the characters, and N.K. Jemisin did. I really enjoyed these characters, and the plot was still there. It was still prevalent. It was just, I wouldn't say it took the back seat. We got a lot of mystery and a lot of intrigue, and there wasn't a lot of development until later in the story where we started to learn more and more about the magic and the world we were living in. But the characters just made the story so rich and so pure and so dynamic in ways. It was a really nice execution. And the last thing I want to touch on with this book is the magic system. And it was fantastic. It was so well done. We saw bits and bobs of it. It didn't run the story, even though it was very much a central theme of the story. These people called origines, I don't really know how to pronounce that word, even though it is also a real world, kind of like earthbenders. They can feel and sense the world and the earth. Like, for example, earthquakes, they can feel tremors far away and control them. They can draw energy from the earth and use that in different ways. And what was brilliant decision by the author was to show us how devastating that can be in this world. So these characters, there were just a couple of events, and one in particular, relatively early in the story, definitely within the first 100 pages, maybe within the first 50 or 60, where something happened. It was just epic. And we're like, as readers, I was sitting there thinking, okay, this isn't just some magic system. This can be wielded. Like, this is powerful. And it got better and better as the story went. And also when we get to the end of the book, there's a lot of questions to be answered. So this isn't a standalone. You can't read this as a standalone. It is going to force you to read the rest of the series, which sometimes I love, sometimes I don't. But you'll see in my April TBR, I will be reading the second book in that series because I got to know what happened. I guts to know. All right, next up, I read Mistborn Era 2. I read the entire trilogy, and I think what was very important for me was to be able to separate it from Mistborn Era 1, because that is one of my favorite, if not my favorite series of all time. I loved Mistborn Era 1 in just about every way, almost every single page. So reading the second one should have been nerve-wracking for me because there's a lot of expectations. But I've heard so many different reviews online, people talking about it being much worse, much better, funnier, not as funny, whatever it might be. And I thought, nah, I'm going to put all that to bed. I'm going to treat it as a totally different story with different characters, which it is, and I'm going to enjoy it for what it is. And that made a world of difference. And it allowed me to really enjoy these books, especially The Alloy of Law, which is the first book. I absolutely loved it. So let's get into it. So this story is set in the same world as Mistborn, although we are 300, I think specifically 330 years in the future, and it's a totally new set of characters, and we get a look at different elements of the magic that we've already grown to love from Mistborn Era 1. We've seen Allomancy in Era 1 and it was amazing. We saw a bit of feruchemy, we saw a little bit of hemalurgy, but not a great deal. Whereas in Era 2, we got a lot of feruchemy. We got to understand it a lot better, the roots of it, where it can lead, what its potential is, and it was awesome. And we do the same with hemalurgy, which is the most sickening magic in Mistborn. By the way, 3 different magic systems in one story, all very well thought out and very developed. Brandon Sanderson is incredible. He's the master of magic. I don't care what anyone says. I love his magic. And I think that Brandon Sanderson executed it beautifully. We didn't get nearly as much magic in this book. It was much more character and plot driven, and the characters were excellent. The characterization was really well done. The comedy was top shelf. In fact, Wayne is now one of my favorite characters that I have ever read in any genre, to be honest with you. Although I'm a fantasy and sci-fi reader, so I haven't read many books outside of that. But he was just so funny. Always. And I didn't lose interest in the comedy by book 3, which is something that often happens to me. If I read enough of a series that's funny, I get used to the style of humor and I stop finding it funny. Not in Wayne's case. He was so good, like so good. So if you've read Era 1 and you're afraid to read Era 2 because it's going to let you down, don't worry about it. Treat it as a different story because it is. It's still Mistborn, but it's definitely different. So don't worry about it. Don't worry about it reaching the same heights. That's not what it's trying to do. It's a totally different story with a different set of characters, and you'll probably love it. All right, next up, Neuromancer. Oh my God. This book was chaos. I still don't know how I feel about it. I don't know if I loved it. It's cyberpunk, which is a really hectic genre. If you love The Matrix and you love cyberpunk, you might really like this book. It was chaos. We are thrown into the thick of it. There is very little explaining. There are so many different terms and terminology thrown around. It was incredibly hard to keep track of, and it's not a leisurely, pleasant read. This felt like work. Like I was reading it page after page. I'm like, what in the world? And then I have to read back and remember what a different term means and what it relates to and what the plot actually is. It was really hard to keep up with and so breakneck fast pace. This book flew. Like every sentence felt like it was progressing the story. It doesn't slow down for a microsecond. So a lot of people are going to love that. And it took me a long time. I reckon the first 100, and it's not a long book, I reckon the first 150 pages, I was like, what? I found it really hard to keep track of, really hard to enjoy. It felt like almost stressful, like it was chaos. But as I started to understand the story better and better, it got better and better. And I kind of learned to like this world. And I would say overall, I can't even say what most people are going to think because I can't even work out what I think. I'd say it was probably a 3.5 star read from me, and that might be slightly generous. It might be more like a 3. Some people are going to love it. If you love The Matrix and you love hectic, chaotic sci-fi, like if you are a sci-fi nut, then you might love it. And if you like cyberspace, then you also might like it. For me, I'm not that into cyberspace. I was willing to give it a go because this guy's almost like the founder. He's the pioneer of the genre. Or the subgenre, I should say. And he was a large inspiration for the Matrix story. So I thought, I've got to give it a go. And it was great in parts. But like I said, this book was chaos. And that's probably all I need to say about it. The next book was so highly anticipated. I couldn't believe it. It was all over TikTok. Everyone was telling me to read it. I have about 14,000 subscribers at the moment on TikTok. If you want to watch that, this is my channel here. I have a lot of fun there. I do short reviews. I do some clips, some funny stuff. It's a great ride. And on TikTok, the amount of people who told me to read that book and review it was just a bajillion. Huge exaggeration. It was a lot of people. And I don't think this book was written for me. There was nothing wrong with it. It just wasn't an adult book at all. And I typically read adult books. It was a YA contemporary fantasy. Contemporary? whatever the word is, it was a YA contemporary fantasy book, and that's not typically something I jive with, and I don't think the author executed it in a way that was for adult readers, although on TikTok, people would disagree with you. What I will say is if you are a YA reader, I think you will love this book. It ticks a lot of boxes. It's got fun magic, it's got some dark characters and some dark themes. It also kind of has this dark vibe throughout it, which I did like that element of the book. I really enjoyed that. It's got Magic Secret Society. It's got, what else has it got? It's got magic competitions. It's going to tick a lot of boxes for YA readers. So for me, it didn't quite hit the mark, but I also don't think it was targeted for me. So it's hard for me to be super critical. But my honest opinion is if you are a YA fantasy reader, you're probably going to enjoy it. There's a lot that you can relate to. The author, I should say, Tracy Deonn, handled elements beautifully, like race issues, because our main protagonist is a young black girl in a contemporary setting at I think they called it pre-college. Was it pre-college? So it was kind of a familiar setting to a lot of people. The race issues were amazing, and the issues surrounding loss and death and mourning were fantastic. So there were things to love. It just wasn't quite for me. All right, ladies and gents, that is going to do this one. 6 books, done and dusted. Like I promised, I enjoyed most of them. They weren't all for me. Overall, a really great reading month. I'm looking forward to April. Subscribe if you want to see my April video or any other videos from me, because I'm going to put out a TBR video very, very soon. So get on board with that. Follow my TikTok if you are interested, and I'll catch you next time. See ya!